Hi, I'm Cyber. Today I have my friend Thanos with me. We will be scaling MCU Thor from all of his
Hi.
appearances.
In the
Um,
MCU and all of his appearances in the comic books, and we are also subbing in for Slash today, since we're doing a video for him. But
exactly.
Cyber, would you
I'll
like
be
to get
giving a
into the MCU?
few ranges for Thor scaling, starting with his lower end scaling. Some of you may be familiar from calcs from a website named Versus Battle, and then we'll go on to the more mid-range scaling, and then the highest possible scaling that's still arguable without wank. So for his lowest end scaling, we have a calc from VSB going on his durability, and this would then scale to his attack potency because there are characters that can harm him. In turn, he can stalemate, if not outright beat them later on. Example being, he can basically harm or fight off like Thanos, for example, in Infinity War, uh, to a degree at least. That being that the
You
calc
would take
hits.
a cake from Thanos.
Yeah, there's also basically what the calc is it takes into account the amount of force he's being hit with by a artificial neutron star. I'll go on later why this like value they give is not necessarily correct, but the feat has been recalced a few times. The lowest end is island, with some putting it at country, which is consistent with their calc for Surtur destroying Asgard, based off of how it's shown to look within Thor Ragnarok. They pixel scaled the size of Asgard and the amount of destructive force needed to destroy it by Surtur. Um, for the more mid-range scaling, well, what should he actually scale to? Will start with Thanos. So at the beginning of Infinity War, Thanos overcharges Thor's ship with the Power Stone. We know that the Power Stone, when it's used on a target, displays practically a amount of energy that's we would term as planetary in the Versus community. This is shown numerous times. The frank example to give would be Guardians of the Galaxy, when it's shown being destroying an entire planet when used by
Yeah,
the
can I
Celestial.
make a comment on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
So a lot of people will bring up how there's a statement with the Guardians of the Galaxy about how the bigger the target, the larger the power surge. So this is relatively inconsistent with how the stone's actually utilized, right? Since even if you were to go by that argument, the power surge wouldn't be that great or that great of a power surge, since it's able to actually the power stone is even able to harm characters such as Thor and Iron Man, right, who both scale above how much how much they would weigh. I think Sai would be able to get into it better. Uh,
Right. If
but
we
like
go with the notion that the power is like selective down to the mass of the target, even taking into account the durability or basically the material that Iron Man's suits are made, or better yet, when the stone is used on Drax or um, others, um, the amount of force would be, if we're arguing it's proportional to their mass, would be significantly lower than where these characters are shown to scale. Um, Even without using the Power Stone as a reference for feats, you have feats like destroying Sokovia, or like even like just general feats from Iron Man using his suit and then like fighting other suits that may be like relative and taking damage. It'd be way higher. Like the amount of force that he'd be receiving if it was only proportional to his own mass with the suit would like be exponentially below town level, when we have multiple different feats from different movies that are consistently well above that for his suit. So
and
it's more
this is even further supported by Thor taking about around the same amount of damage from the Asgardian ship that he was on being destroyed as he was when Thanos was torturing him with the Power Stone. Um, so like the Asgardian ship is quite obviously far greater than Thor. So even if there were a power increase, it wouldn't be that exponential of a boost.
when Thanos uses the stone, it's also consistently planet level. There's a calc for when he rips Titan's moon, that comes around roughly short of into planet. So it's also consistent when he used it against the Avengers. That according to Feige, he wasn't trying to kill. he still released a planetary level amount of force. He later uses this on Iron Man. Iron Man survives hits from this. Thor should be relative as well to that Iron Man, especially after he got his amp after getting Stormbreaker. Speaking of which, the other feat that is relative and important to his scaling is him surviving the energy surge from what's stated to be a neutron star. Many people would discredit this feat by saying that it's not a neutron star because it doesn't behave like one, but they're not taking into account several statements from the directors, including an important one that says it's contained within a Dyson Sphere. This Dyson Sphere is meant to basically channel its energy into one spot, which is then used to melt down the metal in the forgery, as shown in the film. So it does have the actual energy of a neutron star, as stated by the directors and within the film. It's just the aspects that are questionable are basically countered by the fact that it has a proper shelling that deals with those level, that kind of force. The argument that still would pertain is that perhaps it can't properly deal with the gravity or magnetism of the neutron star, because it should be able to contain the heat. That's what it's designed for, right? But this is kind of dubious in a way. It's not taking into account that the metal from used to make Stormbreaker is referenced as being magical in nature by the directors as well. You could also argue this would apply to the Dyson Sphere, which would then suggest how it's capable of dealing with the gravity or the magnetism. Or you could go with the alternative argument. The alternative argument is that there's actually several feats of characters within the MCU surviving being exposed to gravitational force from like black holes, natural ones and artificial ones. And keep in mind that a black hole larger than 1 millimeter would be able to destroy the Earth. So, and several of these are well much larger than 1 millimeter. For example, there's the Devil's Anus.
Black holes on Sakaar, and even fucking Bruce Banner wasn't giving a shit about it. Like,
exactly, the Devil's Anus on Sakaar. All the beings on Sakaar are shown to not be affected in any shape or form by the gravity, despite it being on the planet. This wouldn't actually discount it being a natural black hole, because it's stated both by the directors and in the script it is a black hole. So this would just realistically, within the confines of the movie, just prove that their durability is exponentially above that of a normal human being. This is important again in Thor 2 when Loki was exposed to a black hole grenade, which he survived, and further consistent with the first Thor movie, where a black hole was formed at the at the end of the movie, and basically Loki was sucked in, and we see that he's well and alive in Avengers 1. Thor and Odin were also somewhat within the pool of the black hole as well, and they were just fine as well. They were just having issues with the pool, not necessarily their durability.
Not to mention, literally everyone on Titan was fine when Thanos created his own miniature black hole.
It is stated to be a black hole in the script for the film. The script should be usable, considering that's literally what they used to then translate to make the visuals and all the story that you see in the film. So with that said, right?
Even if you were to lowball this, you could make the argument that it would either downgrade black holes for the verse or upgrade humans for the verse. But yeah, like this should still be consistent.
Anyway, getting back to the Dyson Sphere. Knowing that the Dyson Sphere, its intent, according to the directors, and all the statements and calcs will be in the description, basically it's focusing the energy of the star in one finite point. And in this point, Thor takes this on screen for what seems to be about a minute, but you could also argue it's way longer than that, since it cuts between him surviving it and the battle on Wakanda. So it could be that it's cinematic timing. He was taking it for far longer than a minute. Nonetheless, the amount of energy a neutron star produces is quite frankly large. The gravitational binding energy and the amount of energy one releases, all of its energy, would be what we would term as solar system level, which is exponentially larger than even the largest stars in the universe. And
Well,
Thor
there are
survived
numerous
this for
there are numerous
over a minute.
calcs for neutron stars. The higher in calcs put at solar system level, and as like we mentioned earlier, the lower in ones put at large island to continental.
Yeah, but keep in mind that I did say I was going to mention that those were made under the assumption that it's not producing the amount of energy of a neutron star. Also, it
There
was
are
under
problems with those calcs. But I thought I'd mention the lower ends anyways.
exactly. The other issue with those calcs is they don't take into account that it's being exposed to one finite area, and Thor is pretty much the size of like that tube for the most part. So it's being focused directly on his body, so he is tanking the majority of it, which makes it further consistent for the higher end calcs. Um, Thor would then later on in Endgame be stated by Kevin Feige to be the strongest version. And while some people may attempt to downplay him by saying that Iron Man basically assumed he wouldn't be able to survive the snap, and the snap, according to Iron Man, is stated to produce enough energy to quote unquote light up a continent. This is kind of contradicted in the fact that this Thor is still capable of fighting a basically Thanos that is going all out, and a suppressed Thanos was capable of basically ripping off pieces of the Iron Man suit when the Power Stone failed to do so. So you could argue that a suppressed Thanos is already planet level, and Thor survives hits from this Thanos who's willing to kill. So him having only the durability to survive a continent being lit up is frankly contradicted by actual feats. There's
Thor
also
should
this.
Thor should actually scale to one of Thanos' arms, since he was pressing Thanos. Like Thanos was heavily standing with one of his arms to counter Thor, who's like pressing a Stormbreaker into his chest. Thanos was actually heavily straining to counter that. So Thor should at least scale somewhat relative to him.
Finally, for Thor's highest end scaling, we turn to Thor 2. The Aether was being used by Malakath, and some people will argue that the Aether is quite weak because it required basically a certain situation, that being convergence, the linking of the 9 realms, to have an effect. But it wasn't really that it needed it. It was more so just for the range. Since Malakath's intention, at least initially, is that he wants revenge on the realms. But it is stated numerous times in the film and in the canon comics that it was going to destroy the universe, including by Jane Foster, who was possessed by it at one point, and pretty sure she would have more knowledge on the stone via being possessed than some statements given by some nobodies on that it's not even that it's lower than universal. Not arguing that this is consistent for Thor, it's just his highest high end that is legitimate within the verse. You could argue a degree of consistency based off the fact that there are statements released by Marvel that the stones somewhat scale to all of each other, and he has again been exposed to the Power Stone.
The Power Stone does have statements of possessing all the power in the universe. It should be notable.
Yes, that's what makes it somewhat consistent. We'll be transitioning to Speed, and then we'll be covering his hacks. So
I would like to mention, before we do that, I would like to mention the lower end continental scaling people like Thor, Thanos, and the Hulk.
Right.
Because
there is
if we're going to mention the higher end, I think we should mention the lower as well. So Cyber already mentioned the continental calc, or the low island level calc for the neutron star that is somewhat flawed. There's also Thanos, obviously shattering the Tesseract with one of his hands, and this was calced as continental. I believe. Aren't we going to leave that calc in the description?
Yes, there's also the Hela argument. Hela states that the casket of ancient winters is weak in comparison to the flames that she later uses to resurrect her dead minions. You could argue contextually that when she's saying that, she not only refers to it being weak to the flame, but it would be weak in comparison to herself. This would just be further supported by the fact that she can manipulate the flames and scale to them. The reason this is important is that it's shown that if the casket had been allowed to do what it was intended to do in the original war between Asgard and the ice giants, that it would have frozen an entire planet. And there are calcs for feats like this being well into multi-continental. Hela scales above this. She gets stronger the longer she's on Asgard, and Thor was relative to her to a degree after he got his possible power up. I say possible because Odin explicitly says that he always had this power, and that Mjolnir was just an agent of channeling it. So Thor does also scale to multi-continental as well via this method. He should also scale to Surtur as well, at least by the time that he fights Thanos. There are statements for Thanos being the strongest like individual or strongest fighter in the universe as well, not counting Dormammu, who's outside of the universe. We might be covering Dormammu in a separate video.
26-dimensional.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Thanos?
Well, there is also the continental scaling, obviously, that you mentioned earlier of the Infinity passively being able to light up a continent, and people like Thor, or not Thor, but Thanos, and I guess you could make the argument that Hulk, but Hulk obviously, had it was mostly the energy was mostly gamma, so Hulk was absorbing it. By the way, at the very least, Thanos, who Thor could scale to, it would be continental, but that's about it.
Right. So for speed scaling, we'll keep this short. It's actually just two ends. There are several feats from the films that Thor scales to that have been calced anywhere from massively hypersonic to massively hypersonic plus. You could possibly argue lower with hypersonic, but that's just extremely inconsistent for him, considering he scales to Iron Man, and he also has feats of his own. But you could argue that FTL to MFTL is more consistent, and here's why. First of all, it's been stated that the beams, or at least the lasers used by the Iron Man suits, at least from Iron Man 2 and onward, the beams are light, or at least lasers that function as actual lasers in real life that travel at the speed of light. Thor or other characters that Thor can scale to can react to these lasers, which would give him light speed scaling. Some people would try to demerit his scaling that I'll be bringing further by saying that he scales to characters that can't react to lightning, but this is not true at all. Hela, at some points, and towards the end of Ragnarok, does actually on screen react to his lightning, and this is just assuming that his lightning travels at the normal speed of lightning. His attack speed and combat speed should be relative to his reaction speed. So you could just argue that the lightning is just faster than normal lightning, which is why some characters can't react to it. So for the higher end scaling, Thor was stated to be able to swing Rocket's ship faster than Rocket ship could actually travel. And we've seen that Rocket's ship can travel entire light years worth of distance in a few minutes, putting it at MFTL plus speeds. There's also Thor reacting to, I believe it was Nebula's ship, who, with her ship, has been able to travel faster than light speeds as well, considering the distance it covers in such a small amount of time. Thor can scale to this Thanos, or at least by the time of Endgame, can somewhat scale. There's also...
Did you mention being able to swing Rocket's ship faster than it could fly?
Yeah, I mentioned that.
Yeah.
There's also, if you really want to argue high end, there's a feat from Doctor Strange where it's stated by the directors that he placed one of his stone, the Time Stone, within a nearby star, and he was capable of reacting fast enough to transport it to himself and grab it, in which you could argue his reaction speed would be quite high into MFTL+. The way you would then go about scaling Doctor Strange to that, basically to Thor, is via Thanos. Doctor Strange can somewhat react to him in speed, mostly through his spells by keeping a distance, and Endgame Thor can react to a much faster Thanos because he's not as suppressed as he was, at least the version that was fighting Doctor Strange. There's also
Doctor Strange literally reacted to a blast from Thanos by blocking it with the mirror dimension.
Exactly. There's also the popular MFTL Plus via Captain Marvel, where she can traverse several light years in a few minutes, or at least a few hours. Do you want to go on that, Thanos?
Very flawed, due to the nature of how neutrons work and how she wouldn't be able to fly at her full speed within the atmosphere on Earth.
There is, yes, that is true. Unfortunately, due to how her powers work, it's not somewhat consistent that she'd be able to display this on Earth. But want to mention it nonetheless. So, Thor is just quite frankly fast. He is faster than most characters, if not all characters that are currently in the DCEU. So we'll finish off with his hacks, and then a comment towards the end regarding his character. Um, right off the bat, being an Asgardian, he has Asgardian physiology, which includes their longevity of being able to live for hundreds of years while remaining youthful. He's also shown the ability to regenerate to some degree. He healed after his burn wounds, receiving them from the dwarf star, the neutron star. And he also was able to heal from like stab wounds, including one through the chest. While he has not been able to...
Not in the eye.
While he has not been able to heal from losing his eye, he did receive a replacement. And he's still shown to channel his electricity through said replacement, despite it being mechanical. You could probably argue he could regenerate it later on due to just getting stronger. Would affect his regen as well. He also obviously has the ability to channel lightning, and he can basically change its direction. With Mjolnir, which is basically just a conduit for his power, he can basically move it back and forth as he pleases towards himself as well. Also, due to fighting Malakath, who was basically creating a dark matter storm that was transmuting things, and dark matter has properties of radiation, he should have a resistance to basically just being exposed to radiation and somewhat to transmutation. And he's been exposed to high levels of heat and cold before and has been just fine. He also is a practical and a good warrior. He's had possibly hundreds of years of martial arts training. And while you could still argue that Captain America might, at least on screen, show better fighting skills, that doesn't change or demerit the fact that he's had this level of training. He's also been able to show the ability to produce small earthquakes and tornadoes before, which goes on to weather manipulation to a degree. And just is also able to basically increase his power via what we would call statistics manipulation to a degree as well, especially after his amp from after like Mjolnir was destroyed towards the end of Ragnarok, and also after getting Stormbreaker
with a punch, wasn't he?
Yes. Speaking of Stormbreaker, I believe this is much more interesting to talk about than Mjolnir. So Stormbreaker, when first used, was capable of summoning down a Bifrost bridge. So this gives Thor a few options. It allows him almost instantaneous travel, capable of traveling at MFTL plus speeds, considering that the Bifrost bridge can go between the different 9 realms, which are 9 galaxies, as shown in both stated in the movies and also in the art books. It's also interesting to note that they've been able to destroy entire planets before, and characters that are inferior to Thor have used it to basically launch Hulk to Earth in a matter of minutes. So he should be able to replicate the same things. You could also arguably argue BFR. He would just trap a person within the Bifrost Bridge and shoot them to another part of the universe. Pretty handy hacks. I also wanted to mention he has